Hello and welcome back to Reality Remake. Today we're going to be diving into a really well-known PC game, War Thunder, and finding out if playing it in VR makes it any better. War Thunder is a combination tank fighting, air combat, and ship battle simulator. It's got a ton of vehicles to drive and realistic damage and penetration models, not to mention a huge community. Most importantly, it's got VR support, and that doesn't get talked about as often as you'd think with a game this huge. So I couldn't help but wonder, is War Thunder VR any better than flat screen War Thunder? If you want to get to the actual review, then go ahead and skip ahead to the timecode on your screen. Here, we're going to go over how to play War Thunder in VR so that it's comfortable and looks as nice as we can get it. After that, I'll also talk about a little background on the game in case you're totally unfamiliar with it. Feel free to come back here if combining War Thunder and VR still sounds interesting after the review and you'd like to set it up for yourself. Let's talk a little bit about how we're going to do this. I'm not a massive War Thunder fan. You'll see from the vehicles that I'll be using that I played it just a little bit before. As for the setup, I'll be using Meta AirLink to stream the game to my Oculus Quest 2. I'll also be sitting in a chair right in front of my mouse and keyboard, so a setup using an Oculus Link cable is just as viable to play War Thunder VR. This sort of setup should work for any VR headset or HMD that you have. The first thing I'll say about VR War Thunder is that you should get rid of any notion of using your VR controllers to play it. It is practically impossible to control your vehicle in land, air, or sea with them. You have to use a mouse and keyboard or joystick to control this game properly. Not only are there a ton of buttons you'll need to have access to, way more than there are on any VR controller, but the joysticks are also way too sensitive to properly control your vehicle with. Even after playing with the sensitivity settings, I could never get it to feel smooth so that aiming and turning wasn't extreme pain. Use a mouse and keyboard, trust me. As for the graphics, I noticed that the bitrate is a little low when running War Thunder VR through Steam, and sometimes there was some frame dropping, which is really noticeable and irritating in VR. As an alternative, I downloaded the Gaijin client to run War Thunder through, and after setting the VR mode toggle in the settings, it ran on my headset. There's also a setting to turn camera shake up or down in VR, which I turned all the way down to avoid nausea, and trust me, there'll be some nausea later on in this video. There's also a slider for Sense of Flight in VR. I'm honestly not sure what that does. I didn't notice any changes when I turned it to 100 or to 0. Otherwise, my computer was able to run the game on maximum settings, and it looked pretty good and no longer had any frame drop issues. If you want to get really specific on how to set your graphic settings for VR, check out a forum thread that will be linked in the comments. It helped me a lot. There was still some obvious pixelation on some details, though the general visual experience was not terrible, though not entirely optimized for VR. Oh, and if you're running War Thunder through Steam and want to migrate your Steam account to a Gaijin account to not lose your progress when running the game through the Gaijin launcher, there will also be a guide in the description. As for the game modes we'll be covering, I'll be covering each of these game modes in arcade mode, as that's the mode that most will play War Thunder in, and also because, well, I'm not really good at War Thunder. Arcade mode gives you the most tools if you're a little clueless at the game, and is generally recommended for most players unless you're really hardcore. With the setup out of the way, let's talk generally about what battles in War Thunder look like. Each game mode sets a bunch of player-controlled vehicles on one team, against an equal amount of vehicles on the enemy team on a variety of maps. The strength of each player's vehicles will be roughly comparable. They fight over between 1 and 3 capture points on the map in land or naval battles. In air battles, the objective is to destroy enemy land targets before your opponents destroy yours. Alright, so you're all caught up. Even non-War Thunder enthusiasts know what the game is about and how to play it in VR now. But how do tank battles in War Thunder VR compare to flat screen War Thunder? Well, it definitely looks cooler. As a VR lover, I'm a little biased, but basically everything looks cooler in VR. You feel like you could reach out and touch the other tanks that are close to you. Mountains and trees just naturally seem bigger, and so do the other vehicles near you. Small tanks look and feel smaller, and big tanks look and feel bigger. Everything is more immediate and more impressive. Plane crashing into the ground? The fireball it creates might look cool on the flat screen. In VR, it is truly impressive. The immersive nature of VR just takes all the sights and sounds of a giant tank battlefield to another level. With War Thunder's giant battles, it's a great way to make the whole experience look more impressive. What made the whole experience really awesome was the ability to just look in any direction without having to use a free look key, just by turning your head around. It was downright liberating to freely look around any which way so naturally. Even the grass was fun to look at. This all does come at a price though. Not only do you have to deal with the VR headset on your face, but War Thunder is clearly not supremely optimized for VR. How you interact with the controls is not changed at all, and neither are the HUD elements on your screen. This means you'll have to turn your entire head to find information that you could get at a glance when playing on the flat screen. An option to tack the minimap or other HUD elements to your view would have been a nice choice to have. Instead, you need to manually look down and to the right to see your minimap, down to the left to look at your tank status. You get the idea. Really, this VR mode for War Thunder only replaces your previously flat screen view with a VR camera. While that's sufficient to get some of the majesty of VR immersion into the game, some VR quality of life features would have also been nice. There's not a first-person VR camera option for your tank. The closest you can get is a view right on top of the turret. You could spend the whole game in the gunner's view, I guess, but either way, losing the third-person view would be a disadvantage to you, so no big loss there. First person would have looked very nice though. Otherwise, the VR view can be a bit jarring. It would be nice if there was an option to add blinders with turning or moving your head suddenly for those who might get motion sickness in VR. Mostly it can make it hard to aim. Zooming into aim makes your view very unstable and shaky. This is one hell of a drawback, especially in a game like War Thunder, where a precisely aimed shot can be the difference between an enemy destroyed and your round bouncing off harmlessly. While VR doesn't add too much to the land battles, where it really shines is in the air. Air battles are incredible in War Thunder VR. At this point, I don't even want to play War Thunder's air battles on a flat screen anymore. That experience just pales in comparison to how great virtual reality makes aviation in War Thunder. Just like in the land battles, looking around the battlefield is definitely more impressive. An enemy plane zooming past you feels like an actual plane zooming past you. There's a weird claustrophobia to flying low to the ground. Whizzing over trees and past anti-aircraft batteries, glowing tracers look beautiful crisscrossing in the air, and that's even in third-person view. It gets even better. That's because what makes War Thunder's air battles truly immersive in VR is the first-person cockpit camera. You're no longer shackled to a third-person or overly restrictive gunner's view. On your plane, you can have the view of the actual pilot in it. Your pilot has a body and everything, and that body moves when you move the plane, actually manipulating the controls in front of you. The control panel of the actual plane you are flying is right there in front of you. You can use actual gun sights to fire your weapons, and it is incredible. Looking out over the massive landscape from your cockpit, looking down at the ground rushing past the wings of your plane, practically feels like you're actually flying. Except there's no wind running through your air. If you want a fantastic first-person flying experience, then it is here in War Thunder VR for free. Of course, there are a couple issues here too, though. While the first-person mode is incredible, otherwise all of the problems that tank battles had with the tacked-on nature of the VR support are here as well. You still have to crane your neck to view HUD elements. While aiming in first person is incredibly immersive, it's also not the best way to fight or travel in general. I found myself switching between third and first person depending on the situation, looking around without having the plane itself to get in the way so that I could see and get a lead on opponents was just a lot easier in third person. Often staying in first person view just made the game harder, despite how great it felt to play. Still, first person is better at some things, like shooting at ground targets. More on that later. Oh, and I should mention there's also another camera mode that makes your whole plane disappear except for some of the navigational tools overlaid on your screen, and it's kind of like flying a disembodied head. If you want to play in first person with fewer drawbacks, then that might be for you. Still, even the third person mode is really impressive and fun to play, so I didn't really mind. The one thing I did mind was how difficult the aiming can be, especially when firing at ground targets. Now I know that it's generally easier to destroy targets on the ground with bombs, but it's not uncommon to take them down with direct cannon and machine gun fire. Also, I consistently ran into a problem where the bomb reticle that is normally overlaid on the ground around where your bombs should land was floating in midair and practically unusable. When directly firing at the ground, your target is so small and so far away that it's hard to shoot at it accurately, and you don't have much time, or ammunition, to take them down before you have to pull up or your gun overheats and jams. You might think, well, obviously, just zoom in so that you can get a better look and shoot more accurately. Well, if you ever do that, I hope you don't vomit easily. Zooming in on a tank that was standing still was a little nauseating, but zooming in while piloting a moving airplane, it's practically a one-way ticket to motion sickness city. There's absolutely no camera smoothing, so the tiniest movement of your head makes your whole view rock and shake drastically. Trying to zoom in when you're in third person generally just gets you a close-up of your plane, so zooming in when in first person is really your best option, and it's jarring to say the least. Good luck hitting much on the ground in War Thunder VR air battles. Honestly, just forget the zoom button altogether. Your head and stomach will thank you. Unfortunately, the virtual reality fun stops at ship combat, where VR land combat has some problems but is serviceable, and VR air combat is fantastic, despite a little bit of jankiness and a few bugs. VR ship combat is not enhanced by virtual reality. War Thunder's ship combat in VR is actually worse than it is on the flat screen. Not only does ship combat have the already existing problems that land and air combat have, but almost nothing is added by VR. There's only third person and the gunner's view now, and any ship larger than a patrol boat is so large that it always gets in the way when you're trying to aim. Since the distances you'll be firing at are so huge, generally at least a kilometer, but often further, you will constantly be using the gunner view and zooming in as much as you can. Though you do have a quasi-first-person view on smaller ships like little patrol boats, which is alright, though no matter what size of ship you are piloting, you'll end up in the gunner's view a lot, zooming in. Like I've said, zooming in War Thunder doesn't translate well into virtual reality. While looking at your huge ship is kinda cool, it gets very hard to control because you are constantly forced to change the angle of your view to fire broadsides and torpedoes, which come out of the side of a large ship. Patrol boats kind of function like sea-bound tanks and are so less impaired by this issue, but the constant zooming and firing while moving is nauseating and unpleasant in VR. The environment and effects aren't particularly nicer in VR either. Looking across the water in first person might have been cool, though impractical, but from the third person view, water is basically water, and the fighting is so much more spread out that the sense of majesty of airborne and land battles is kinda gone. I had a headache after playing a single match, and even if you are immune to motion sickness, there's really not a lot to be gained by playing the sea battles in VR. Well, there you have it. That's how War Thunder VR stacks up. Land battles are pretty good, air battles are great, and you're better off staying on the flat screen for naval combat. Overall, I'd say that the addition of VR to War Thunder was a fantastic idea, though it could have used a little bit more love during implementation. It's still a lot of fun to experience and to try at least once. And hey, it's free, so why not? This has been Reality Remake. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you liked this video, leave a comment if you got something to say, and if you want to see more videos about VR, subscribe. Oh, and make sure you have fun out there.